Chapter 9, Grandpa Jack. Now I have to tell you about my Grandpa Jack and what happened when he finally came to our house to live and how he settled in and everything like that. And that's another too long sentence. I used to know my grandparents very well when I was little and they lived close by. I remember they used to come to our house most weekends and they played with me a lot. But then Grandma got this terrible disease. They call it emphysema, but they spell it E-M-P-H-Y-S-E-M-A. It comes from smoking cigarettes, which if anybody does, they have to be crazy. This emphysema made it very hard for Grandma to breathe. Mom said that on windy or cold days, Grandma was not allowed to put a foot outside her house, or any other part of her either. It was around then that Jenny was born, and Grandma and Grandpa moved to Florida. Mom said it was for the warm weather, which was good for Grandma's lungs. I remember being sad when they left. I loved them a lot. I loved how they always wanted to play with me, and almost anything I did was okay with them. Starting then, I saw them only when we would go to their house in Florida at Christmas. The rest of the year we would talk on the telephone maybe once a week. And then Grandma died. Now Grandpa was alone, and it was hard to think about. I only knew my Grandma and Grandpa together. They were never apart when they saw me and the family. They were a pair, like shoes or gloves. But now there was only Grandpa. Dad brought Grandpa home from the airport. He pulled the car up in the driveway and tooted the horn. We all ran outside and Jenny jumped right on Grandpa's neck as soon as he got out of the car, even though Mom had just said not to. Dad finally had to take her down. Then Grandpa gave me a long hug and held me away to look at me. "You're no Peapod anymore," he said, which was a nickname he had called me. "Petey, you're springing up like a weed. You must have grown 3 inches since Christmas." He smiled at me then, with little lines crinkling up around his eyes. I smiled back at him. He looked different to me from the last time I'd seen him. The lines and wrinkles in his tan face looked deeper. His shoulders stooped down, and there was kind of a sad look in his eyes, even when he was smiling. And when we finally got into the house, with Dad and me helping to carry Grandpa's things, I could see that Grandpa was limping worse than ever. Grandpa used to be in the construction business until he retired, building houses mostly. Years ago, a big piece of wood fell on him and broke his leg. Mom and Grandma always said it never healed right, and now Grandpa had something wrong with his leg that Mom called arthritis. It was late when Grandpa arrived, and we all carried his things upstairs and tried to help him get settled into his room. My room, I mean. My old room that was now his. My idea of helpful was to take Grandpa's shirts out of his suitcase and put them into his dresser. Jenny's idea of helpful was to do pirouettes in the middle of the room, banging into everybody. Mom finally shooed Jenny and me out and made us get ready for bed. I did all my go-to-bed things and got into my pajamas and went downstairs to the kitchen to say goodnight to Mom and Dad. They were sitting at the kitchen table, drinking tea. I knew when I walked in that they were saying private things to each other because they shut up quick when I came in and looked at me kind of funny. My mom looked real sad, like she was getting ready to cry. She hugged me a little extra tight, I thought, and ruffled my hair. I said goodnight. I didn't go back to my room, though. What I did was hang around under the staircase to hear what they were saying. I was right about my mom. She was crying. "He looks so awful," she sobbed. "Please, Sally," I heard my dad say. "He's very tired, you know. It's been a very long day for him. He'll be fine after he gets some rest." "There's just no life in him," Mom said. "No life." "It's only a few months since she died," Dad said. "He's very depressed. Give it time, hon." "I hope you're right," Mom said. I sneaked up the stairs very quietly so my folks couldn't hear me and went to say goodnight to Grandpa. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding something in his hand. I could see it was a photograph of Grandma in a silver frame. "Good night, Grandpa," I said, but I don't think he heard me. He just kept very still, staring at Grandma's face in the picture. My mom was right, I thought as I went up to my room. Grandpa had no life at all. Could you die from being sad? I wondered. Could you? Chapter 10. Another night, another fright. It was still scary upstairs in my new room, maybe even more than it was the night before. The floorboards creaked again. The same shadows and light danced around on the ceiling. I still had the thought that a murderer was waiting outside my door to come in and kill me in my bed. You can laugh all you want. I was scared silly. Chapter 11. Only a dope will mope. Now I have to tell you about a special word. It's called mope. My sister Jenny does that a lot. She's a real moper, Mom says. It means standing around with your face hanging out and looking like doomsday is tomorrow. Only a dope will mope, Mom says to Jenny all the time. Usually Jenny mopes when she wants Mom to stop what she's doing and play cards with her or something. Naturally, Jenny always does her moping when Mom is real busy. "Not today, Petey, thanks," he'd say. And he'd sit on the porch or in the living room and just do nothing. I'll bet in the first couple of weeks he was living with us, he never even went as far as around the corner. He just sat around. That wasn't how he acted before he went to Florida and Grandma died. Back then, when I was little, I remember how peppy he was. "We'll have more fun than a barrel of monkeys," Grandpa used to say. And we did. He used to take me to places like the park and the zoo. I was always happy when I was with him. I liked everything about him. His little white mustache that jumped up and down when he talked. The way he'd throw me up in the air and catch me, or spin around fast, holding me in his arms. Even his breath, which always smelled of peppermints. I liked the way he'd toss me a ball and I'd try to catch it. I was little then and could hardly hold on to the ball, but it was fun playing with him. I know Mom and Dad were concerned about Grandpa and the way he just seemed to be tired out and moping all the time. We went out to the movies a couple of times and to a restaurant, but Grandpa always stayed home. "You go ahead," he'd say. "I'll be okay back here by my lonesome." "Come on," Dad would say. "We'll have some fun." "Have fun then," Grandpa would say. "I'd only spoil it for you." I saw the worried looks that passed between Mom and Dad, but when I asked Dad about it, he just said, "Grandpa's a little tired, Peter, that's all. He'll snap out of it soon." Sure, I thought, but how soon was soon? Chapter 12. A little help from my friends. "I don't care what you say," my friend Steve Meyer said. "I think it stinks." "Steve's right," Billy Alston said. "Your grandfather is a room robber and it isn't fair." "By the way," Steve said, "I'm invading Quebec." We were playing Risk, which is what we always played at Steve's house. I know that because I once bet him he couldn't and lost a quarter. I can do 3.5 chin-ups. Steve can hardly do 1. "Throw the dice," Steve said, and I did. I lost another army, of course, and Steve had one more territory of mine to control. Steve looked at me and shook his head. "You're such a dummy," he said. "Look," I said, "he's my grandfather. What can I do?" "Put up a fight," Steve said. "Stick up for your rights." "I already have," I said. "I won't let nobody take my room," Billy said. He made a fist and slammed it into his other palm. "Pow, right in the nose." "Right, Billy," Steve said, winking at me. We both knew that Billy always talked tough like that, but the one time he had to face up to a kid in school called Phil Steinkraus, he was as chicken as the rest of us. "I'm trapped, don't you see?" I said. "I can't let my grandpa know how mad I am at losing my room. And if I can't even talk about it, what can I do?" "Wishy-washy," Steve said. "What are you, a doormat?" "You can't let a room robber walk all over you," Billy said. Steve put down his 4th set of matched Risk cards and collected 10 more armies. On the board, he already controlled half the world, which meant the game wasn't going to last too much longer. He looked at me funny, and then a slow grin started to spread all over his face. "Just got an idea," Steve said. "Yes, sir-ree, it just might work." I waited while the wheels turned around in Steve's head. 1776, Steve said. Billy said, "Huh?" "The Yankees against the power of the British Army," Steve went on. "Here come the Redcoats marching across a field in close formation. That's the way the British always fought. And what do the Minutemen do? They hide behind trees and rocks. They shoot from behind cover and keep moving." "What does that have to do with his grandpa?" Billy asked. Steve sailed on. "Do you know that the British complained that the Minutemen didn't fight fair? Fair?" "Steve," I began. "The legend of Zorro," Steve went on. "A rich and powerful man who fought the power of the king. He had to conceal his identity, because to fight against the king meant certain death. So what did he do to help the peasants against tyranny? He hid his face behind a mask." "Like Batman and Robin," Billy said. "Close," Steve said. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Get a sword and fight a duel with Grandpa?" "Guerrilla warfare," Steve said, almost to himself. "When you're trapped and there's no other way, you fight from behind rocks. You conceal your identity." "You're crazy," I said. "It's the only way," Steve said. "Think about it." Chapter 13. A Light in the Attic. Guerrilla warfare. Hiding behind rocks and trees. Wearing a mask. I was lying up in my bed and thinking about what Steve had said. It seemed crazy to me, and yet it made sense, too. I was certainly trapped. My family had taken my room away and hadn't given me a chance to fight back. Then I began to think about the people who fought in the Revolutionary days. Who were they fighting? The king. And the king was kind of a father to them, or maybe even a grandfather. He was certainly the biggest big shot of 1776, that's for sure. And yet they fought for their rights. They took a chance and stood their ground at Lexington and Concord and fired the shot heard round the world. But you don't shoot at your grandfather. Not in my family, anyway. It was hopeless. But then I got a funny thought. And still another one. And the whole idea of what I could do became clear to me. Chapter 14. War is declared. I scouted around, and when nobody was looking, sneaked down to my dad's office in the basement. It was a mess. There were 3 lights in the ceiling, but only one of them worked. Dad had put down the floor himself, and some of the tiles were loose. There was a sink in the corner near the bathroom, but it didn't work and nobody knew how to fix it. Lucky for me, all I wanted was to use Dad's typewriter, and that was working. When you start a war, you have to send the enemy a note, or something like that, telling them what you want and why you want it. I had to let Grandpa know why I was about to go to war with him, and I really didn't want to sign my name to the note or even have it in my handwriting, because if my parents got a hold of it, that would probably be the end of the war, and the end of me, probably. I stuck a piece of my dad's scrap paper in his typewriter and began. Here's what I typed. Declaration of war. You have stolen something that belongs to me. You have taken my room, and I want it back. This is a warning. You have 24 hours to give me back what is mine, or else war will begin. I signed it this way. The Secret Warrior. I thought that was pretty good. The note sounded hard and tough, like I really meant business. To tell the truth, I was so nervous my hands were shaking. And then I thought Grandpa would certainly show it to Mom and Dad, so I put in a P.S. at the bottom. P.S. This war is between you and me. Don't tell my parents or I'll never talk to you again. Well, I thought, if you're going to start a war, this note was a good way to begin. Now the question was, what should I do with it? I thought about that for a long time. About 10 minutes, anyway. I wanted to put it someplace where Grandpa could find it when he was alone. I sure didn't want anyone else in the family to see it. That meant I had to put it in Grandpa's room. My room, really, until he stole it. And I had to sneak it in there sometime when my mom wasn't coming up there to clean. I waited until after dinner. All the time I had that note folded up and tucked into my pants pocket, which was practically the whole day. I was like a shivery rabbit. Just feeling that piece of paper crinkling in my pocket made me nervous. I sneaked upstairs when Grandpa sat down in front of the TV in the living room, which was where he was almost every night now. I went into Grandpa's room and closed the door quietly behind me. Then I looked around. On top of the dresser, Grandpa had a photograph of Grandma in an old silver frame. Next to it was his hairbrush and comb. Then the door opened suddenly, and I almost jumped out of my skin. "Hi, Pete," Jenny said. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," I said real fast. My voice was so high and squeaky, it sounded funny in my ears. Jenny gave me a strange look. "Did I frighten you?" she asked. "No, you didn't frighten me," I lied. "You look funny," she said, then shrugged. "You want to play casino? Mom and Dad are busy and Grandpa is too tired." That was just like Jenny. Here I was, about to start a war, and she wanted to play games. "No, I don't want to play casino," I said, "or any other stupid game. Why don't you go downstairs and watch TV with Grandpa, or read a book, or go practice ballet, or do anything instead of coming up here and bothering me?" She looked at me for a long minute. "Weird," she said. "Totally weird." Then she walked out of the room. If this was how a war is, I thought, I wouldn't make a very good soldier. I took the folded note from my pocket, unfolded it, and stuck it under Grandpa's bedspread and on top of his pillow. He'd have to be blind not to see it, so he would surely read it tonight, and then the war between us would start. I felt nervous about it, but not too much. Whatever was going to happen, I was ready for. Then I went upstairs to my stinky room and threw a tennis ball against the wall about 40 million times. Chapter 15. It takes two sides to fight a war. Well, it was a lot of fear and worry over nothing, because Grandpa didn't say or do anything about my note. Not the next day, anyway, or the day after that. I didn't know what to do. Here I had declared war and written a note, and my enemy totally ignored the whole thing. It looked like it was going to be the shortest war in history. That day, and the one after, I followed Grandpa around and gave him plenty of chances to talk to me when nobody else was around. I even sat through a whole afternoon with him while he watched those stupid soap operas on TV. Later, I went to the candy store with him when he wanted to buy some cigars. It took forever to walk 2 blocks because Grandpa just limped along so slowly. "Is there anything you want to say to me?" I asked him on the way back. He grinned at me. "Only that I like your company, Petey. You are very easy to be with." "Isn't there something you read lately that you want to talk about?" I asked. "Like a note?" I almost said. "Just the newspaper," he said. "And there's so much bad news in it. I try not to pay too much attention." I was learning something about Grandpa. He was one of the world's best ignorers, and my fight to get my room back looked like it would never even get started.